In this video today, we're going to review a financial plan for a couple that's trying to make a big decision. They're trying to decide whether or not they should sell their home and buy a new home, or should they just renovate their current home? And I think you'll be surprised by the impact of their decision because it made them be able to retire 5 years earlier. So as financial advisors and CFPs, we run a lot of these different scenarios for clients, and you might be able to find some parallels to your own situation. And if there's ever a situation that you'd like for us to analyze for you in one of these videos, please leave a comment below. And if you like these videos, please give it a thumbs up and also subscribe so you can be notified of more videos in the future. But let's go ahead and jump into this analysis. So Ryan and Jennifer are both right around 57. So they just turned 57. And Ryan makes $350,000 a year. And Jennifer makes $250,000. So whenever we run these financial plans, it's important that we use projected returns rather than historical returns. So if you're ever using any kind of financial plan analysis software, this is an important point because, the old saying is that past performance is not indicative of future results. Well, it's important to take some type of projection as to what we think the market might do in the next 10, 20, 30 years and not what it's done in the past, right? So let's jump into look at what their goals are and look at the foundation of this financial plan. So Ryan and Jennifer both want to retire at 65. So Ryan said he's willing to work until 70. So whenever we do financial planning, we always ask for an ideal and an acceptable age. Ryan said he's willing to work until 70, but Jennifer said that 65 is non-negotiable. So we have our ranges there. They also want to spend $160,000 a year. Now, typically when we look at spending in retirement, if one spouse is going to predecease the other, we typically assume that expenses are going to go down a little bit in retirement when one spouse predeceases the other. They have less clothes to purchase, they have less transportation costs, and they have less food to buy, right? So there's a number of things that might go away, and so we typically cut about 20% of those expenses. Of course, in this case, it's only from age 90 to 95. So that 2059 to 2063 when one of them is alone and retired. So healthcare is another thing that we want to consider. So healthcare is one of those other overlooked expenses in retirement. And a lot of times during working years, it's covered by your employer, right? So 60, 70, 80% of your healthcare expense is typically covered by your employer during your working years. So a lot of people don't take that into consideration when they think about what their basic living expenses are going to be in retirement. So we've got another $10,000, $11,000 roughly budgeted for their healthcare expenses in retirement. And that takes into account Medicare Part A, Part B, Part D, also some out-of-pocket expenses, right? So everything's taken into account there. And we also inflate healthcare at a much higher rate, right? So healthcare typically and historically has gone up at a higher rate than other basic living expenses. So while we might inflate basic living expenses at one rate, we're going to inflate healthcare at a higher rate. So we also have their current mortgage. So in this scenario, we have their current mortgage of $35,000 a year only being accounted for 1 year because they want to sell their house in 2026 and they want to buy a new home. So that current mortgage in this scenario is for 1 year, and then they start a new mortgage payment. So the $1.5 million house, they're going to put a $500,000 down payment because they're going to sell their current home and they're going to buy the new home. So they're going to sell their current home, get a net proceeds of $500,000, and then they're going to have a mortgage of $1 million. Now, we use the number 6.5%, so we don't know where interest rates are going to be next year, but we use 6.5% at a 30-year fixed mortgage. And so that's how we modeled this mortgage payment of $75,000 a year. So there's our down payment of $500,000. And then we also have travel. So travel is something that's important to them, and they want to make sure that they have something budgeted for travel. So out-of-pocket expenses in this scenario, we've got $160,000 plus 10, 170. We've got their new mortgage, right, is going to be another $75,000 plus travel. So that's going to be all of their out-of-pocket expenses, and that's after-tax money going out the door. So now let's take a look at Social Security. So they're both right around the same age, and we have it modeled as them both taking at full retirement age. Now, there are some things that they can do to sort of play with their Social Security. One of them could take it at full retirement age. One of them could wait until later. But for this base case scenario, we have them both modeled as taking at full retirement age, which for them, based on their date of birth, is age 67. So if you remember, if you're born before January 1st, 1954, your full retirement age is 66. And then as your birth date ticks up, every year it goes up by a couple of months. So 66 in 2 months, 66 in 4 months, and then ultimately it gets to 67. Now let's take a look at Ryan and Jennifer's assets. So Ryan has a retirement account with $850,000 in it, and he's saving $45,000 a year. Now, you can't save $45,000 a year directly into a 401k out of your deferred compensation. You can't defer out of your income $45,000, but because Ryan is over the age of 50, he can defer $31,000 a year, and then his employer is matching 100% of the first 4%. So I'll explain that a little bit more. So the typical employer match, and typically based on Safe Harbor, they're either going to match 4% or they're going to do a 3% non-elective. And there's some combinations or other options that they can take, but that's typically the minimum that they have to do for what's called a Safe Harbor contribution. So 100% for the first 4% is typical, and the highest amount of compensation that's eligible for an employer match is $350,000. So in this case, Ryan makes $350,000. So the maximum match for him and the match that he's going to receive is $14,000. So $31,000 plus the 14 gives him $45,000 of savings. It's pretty powerful to get that full match, and is why we typically recommend to maximize the amount of match that you're getting from your employer, right? Because if he were to just save 4% of his salary, he would get $14,000 that he's saving, but that his employer would save another $14,000, right? So that would be a total of $28,000, and he's only saving $14,000. In this case, he's saving $31,000. His employer's saving another $14,000 and giving him $45,000. Now, if you make $500,000 a year and you're putting away 4% of your salary, you're only going to get that $14,000. So that's where that maximum eligible compensation comes in. It maxes out at $350,000. So Ryan has $850,000 in his 401k and is saving $45,000. Jennifer has $275,000 in her 401k, and she's saving $41,000, of course, including the match. So she's got her maximum $31,000, and then she's getting a match that she's getting on top of that. Of course, that $31,000 is with the catch up for being over 50 years old. And then they've got a joint investment account with about $1.5 million in it. So their after-tax savings, and this is where they've really started to pick up in the last couple of years, their after-tax savings is $80,000. So total, everything together, and you can also see where those matches can really juice your savings. They're saving $166,000 a year. So every year that they're working, they're putting away another $166,000 a year. So let's go ahead and look at sale of their current home in this scenario. So they bought this home in 2020. The current value is $800,000. And if they sell it in 2026, we expect that they're going to receive about $500,000. The current value is $800,000, or what they would sell it for next year. They're going to have to pay off $250,000 worth of debt. And they're going to have a sales expense of $48,000. So you back all of that out and you get the net cash amount of $500,000. Now, remember, there's an exemption with the 2 of 5 rule, right? So if you've lived in a house 2 of the last 5 years, you're actually exempt up to $250,000 per spouse. So you can be exempt up to $500,000 for a married couple. So in this case, they don't have to pay any taxes at all on this sale. Their biggest expense here is the sales expense for the agent, and that's 6% typically. If the agent's on both the buying and the selling side, sometimes it could be negotiated down to 5%, but typically it's going to be a 6% sales expense. So let's take a look at what outcome all of these variables in this financial plan lead to. And keep in mind, we use something called Monte Carlo simulation. So Monte Carlo simulation takes 1,000 different possibilities of what could happen during their lifetime. So the old way of doing things is saying, okay, if I can take out 4% a year, then I'm good. Or you take your annual living expense and multiply it by 25, and then that's your number, right? And the problem with that methodology is that it's a very linear way of thinking. And at the end of the day, the market isn't very linear. You've got up markets, you got down markets, and life isn't so linear either, right? There's a lot of different variables that can come in, additional expenses that might come up from time to time. And so Monte Carlo simulation attempts to take a lot of those different variables into account. So let's take a look at what these trials would do. So what does this mean? So a 61% probability of success means that 610 trials made it to the end of their life without running out of money. So that's all of these green lines. But it also means that 390 trials ran out of money before the end of their life. So typically we like to see people in the green zone, the confidence zone, because it means that the probability is not too high and it's not too low, but it's just right. If we're in the blue zone, that means the probability is too high. It means that they're sacrificing something today for tomorrow, or vice versa, right? They could spend more, they could retire earlier, or a combination of all the above, or even take less risk, right? If we're in the purple zone, that's a problem as well. It means that maybe we need to retire later, we need to save more, spend less, or again, a combination of all the above. So let's take a closer look at some of these numbers. So if we were to look at the actual cash flow on a year-to-year basis, we can see the addition to assets. So here's the house sale going through, but then subsequently the same year, so they have this big liquidity event, it goes right back into a house. At the same time, their mortgage payment goes from $35,000 to $75,000. So living expenses stay the same. They have a liquidity event, doesn't really help them because it goes right back into the new house. And then their mortgage goes up significantly, right? So it goes from $35,000 to $75,000. So if we were to continue to assume that they are going to sell their house and they are going to buy a new home for $1.5 million, taking the proceeds from their current home and putting it as a down payment toward the new home, then we don't have a lot of other variables to work with. So the $160,000 was really their base case scenario. They didn't really want to spend more, but they also didn't feel comfortable spending less on their basic living expenses. So our only other variable that we had to work with was really their retirement age. So Ryan said he was willing to work until 70. So we increased the retirement age to age 70, keeping all of the other expenses the same. And by doing so, we were able to make the plan work. So if Ryan were to work until age 70, they could have a 88% chance of hitting all of their goals, and that's with buying their dream home. So selling their home and buying their dream home. But working 5 more years is a lot of years to work. And as financial advisors, typically we're very cautious about allowing people to say, well, I'm just going to keep working, because it's not always their choice, right? There could be a big company reorganization and they could lose their job. And at 68 and 69, it can be very difficult to go back and find another job because you might not be as marketable as you were 5-10 years ago. So typically we advise caution in using that as an ace in the sleeve. So let's take a look at what would happen if we just renovated the home that they're in, that they didn't go out and buy a new home and sell their current home, but they just put $400,000 into a renovation. So one of the reasons why they wanted to buy a bigger home is that they've got grandchildren. The grandchildren are coming over to visit. They want to build a pool. They want to build their basement out. So right now they have an unfinished basement. Right, so part of buying that new home was going to be able to get extra bedrooms, get a pool, get a nice place outside that they could have a built-in grill, they can have nice seating and a patio. But what if they could do that all by just renovating their current home? So they currently have an unfinished basement and they have a nice backyard that they can work with. So let's take a look at if we adjust these numbers to assume that they're going to renovate rather than buy and see how that affects their financial plan. So I've switched it back here to age 65 for retirement for both of them because that's their ideal retirement age. So for their current mortgage, while they were only paying for it for 1 year before, now they're going to continue paying it for 10 years because they bought the house in 2020. It was a 15-year mortgage, and so they have 10 years left until that $35,000 a year mortgage is paid off, right? Then we're going to change the new mortgage. So we're going to assume that they're going to borrow a portion of the renovation money. So we're going to assume $400,000 for the entire renovation, and let's assume that they put $200,000 down. So if they were to finance it at 7.5% for $200,000 for 30 years, it comes up with a $16,776 mortgage. Of course, there's no inflation on a mortgage, right? Because it's set a 30-year fixed rate mortgage. So it's important to note that we did assume a 7.5% mortgage for the cash out or second mortgage, right? Because when you're taking money out of a house that you already own, many times the lender is going to charge you a higher rate than if it's a primary home new purchase. So sometimes you get favorable rates when it's a new purchase. So we use 6.5 for the new home purchase, and we use 7.5 just considering current mortgage rates, and we wanted to be conservative when we were comparing these two scenarios. Now, before we were putting $500,000 down payment toward the mortgage. Now we have $400,000 that we need to come up with in order to renovate the home. And so this is now a renovation, right? So that's a renovation. And let's say we're putting $200,000 in cash out of investments and cash flow into the renovation of this home. So that gets us the new scenario. So basic living expenses stay the same. We're going to continue paying this mortgage for the next 10 years until it's paid off. And then we're going to take on some more debt at roughly $16,000, $17,000 for the next 30 years. And we're going to come out of pocket for $200,000. Travel expenses stay the same, and we're still going to retire at age 65. So let's see what happens with all of these variables in play if we were to run a Monte Carlo simulation. So in renovating the home, we're able to get an 88% probability of hitting their goals, and that's with retiring at age 65. So remember, in order for us to get the elevated probability of success in the last scenario in purchasing the new home, we had to work until 70. Ryan had to work until age 70. In this scenario, he can still retire at age 65, and he has an 88% probability of hitting his goals. So let's look at some of the numbers here. So you can see based on an average return scenario, this is the assets at the end of his life or at the end of Jennifer's life. Here's the end of Ryan's plan or the end of his life when he predeceases Jennifer. But let's look at the overall mortgage expense, because that's one of the big things that makes a difference for them. Here you have the $35,000 a year mortgage, right? Goes away at the end of the 10-year mark. So when they reach 66, it goes away. And here's the $16,776 that continues on for pretty much the rest of their plan, right? It ends up dropping off in year 2055 when they're both 87. But so that difference in expenses really makes a big difference on their overall financial plan. So in summary, while it was one of their dreams in order to have a new home that could have extra bedrooms, they could have a finished patio, and also have a swimming pool, the added expense really made it difficult for them to retire at their ideal retirement age. And by being able to do a renovation on their home and achieving all of those similar goals, patio, swimming pool, extra bedrooms, they were able to retire 5 years earlier and still hit all of their other financial goals. I hope you've enjoyed this video. If you had, again, please subscribe below and hit the thumbs up, and be on the lookout for more videos from this channel. Thank you.